With the last section, we talked about general population dynamics. Today, we're going to look deeper at the human population and how it differs between countries and areas and our different populations of people. So when we study people, we can look at several different things: their behavior, their economics, how they get the things that they need, and we can look at their social structure, which it would be their family structure, or maybe how they live, the density, how many old people versus young people we have. And we end up putting our countries or our populations into two different categories. Our developed nations or our developed communities tend to have higher incomes, they have slower population growth, and they have diverse industrial economies, meaning that we create and use various types of goods, not just the basics to keep us alive, but more diverse things. Developing nations tend to have lower incomes per person. They tend to have very simple agriculture-based economies, just basically whatever they need to survive. And they tend to have rapid population growth. Now, through time, our human population has changed based on the carrying capacity of the world that we're in. You notice for a very long time, our semi-nomadic groups of people tended to be very stable in population because that's the amount of people that could be supported by the world as we knew it. Now, as we've modified our world, we have modified those limiting factors and modified the carrying capacity. So as we've gotten better at agriculture and health and hygiene, our carrying capacity has shifted upwards, and we've been able to support a larger amount of people. Now, recently, you notice this huge exponential growth in the numbers of people in our world. That's due to an increase in production of food, making it more industrial, so we could get more nutrition per acre or per farmer, and then also improvements in hygiene that have allowed us to live longer. When we look at populations, we can look at the size of the population. We can also look at the age structure, how many people are in certain age groups. And this will help us forecast what the population will do in the future. If a group has more young people than old people, then as those young people get older, then they will grow up and have children of their own, and we'll have an increase in population. However, if, like Germany over here, you end up with less young people and more old people, your population tends to be older on average, then as those young people grow up, there's not as many of them to have the next generation. So that will end up giving you a negative population growth, not because people are dying, but as they get older and die, there's not as many people in the population to replace them. So remember our survivorship curves. People tend to be type 1. We have, for every 1,000 babies that are born, most of them will survive and grow up to older age. This will help give us an idea of how our population will change as they get older. We can look at a couple of things when forecasting population survivorship being one, but also looking at the fertility rate, which is the average number of children born to a woman in her lifetime. For many, many years, women had many children. They had very big families because all of those children were needed to help take care of the household and to get the food needed for the family to survive. However, you notice as our nation become more developed, as we went through the Industrial Revolution, on this chart, you see the United States and Canada in the 50s and 60s. Suddenly, you had a decrease in the number of the number of children born per woman. In fact, if you notice, that black line that goes straight across is what we call replacement level. And in the 70s is about the first time that you noticed our fertility rate dropping below replacement level. The replacement level is how many kids on average a parent team must have in order to replace themselves in the population. You have a mom, you have a dad. Why is it not exactly 2? Well, it needs to be slightly above 2 because you have to account for some children either not making it to adulthood to reproduce and have their own children, or choosing not to reproduce. Something has happened. Maybe they do not have the ability to reproduce, or they don't have the desire or whatnot. So right now we're below replacement level. but our population is still increasing. Another thing that goes into our population size is not just the babies born, but how many people are moving into a country. That's migration. Migration is the movement of individuals from one area to another. To move into an area is immigration. To move out of an area is immigration. So if we look at the United States population, we might be below replacement level on our fertility rate, but we have a lot of people moving into the country, so our population is still increasing. When we look at population change, remember we look at how many people are added to the population, either by birth or by moving in. And then we take out how many people are removed from the population, either by dying or by moving out of the country. We also, even though we're having less babies, we're also living longer. So there's more people in the population at a time. And this goes for all of our nations. You notice here we've got the more developed nations in orange, the least developed nations in yellow. Even though they are still well below our developed nations, our developing nations are increasing as well. Hopefully they will eventually catch up to us. So reasons for a declining death rate for our high average age that we live to, our life expectancy, one would be access to adequate food. Do we have the nutrition that we need to be healthy and to live a long time? Do we have access to clean water? Not only for health's sake, but for diseases. There's a lot of diseases that are borne by unclean water that used to kill many, many people. And because of advancements in clean water, we have increased our life expectancy in those areas. Safe sewage, again, transmission of diseases. If we don't have safe sewage, then you get more people getting sick and dying. And then access to vaccines. A lot of the diseases like polio or measles that caused a lot of deaths in the past, we now have vaccines for and don't have to worry about. We don't have many children dying of measles every year. So the life expectancy is how many years a member of a population is expected to live. And then infant mortality is the death rate of infants that are less than a year old. Those are the most vulnerable of our population, the ones that are very young and can't care for themselves. So if people have access to education, to know how to take care of them, if there's adequate food and water, and if there is enough fuel to keep these babies warm, and we mean like fuel, like think of heating your home, right? If you are able to heat your home, then those babies are able to live longer and we have a reduction in infant mortality. All these can increase our life expectancy. Now, our population as a whole is growing exponentially. When we look at how long it's going to take to double in size, we look at the average growth percentage, the growth rate, and we take the rule of 70. So take 70, just the number 70, divide by that percentage growth rate, and we get how many years it would take to double in size. We played with this a little bit when we talked about just general populations, but the same will go for our human populations as well. When we look at the change of populations, then we get this model that begins to show up. As our economic and our social structures change, our growth rates also change in a predictable pattern. So we can divide it into 4 sections. Our pre-industrial phase is where our birth rates and our death rates are both very high. We're having lots and lots of children, but then not a lot of them are making it into old age. In our transitional period, our death rates begin to decline as we get better hygiene and better nutrition, but we're still having a whole lot of kids. So many children, but more of them living longer gives a very big population boom. Then we get to that industrial phase, which is about where we are now. We're towards the end of our industrial phase, where our population growth has begun to slow down as not only our death rate has declined, but also our birth rate begins to decline. We end up with better education and better health. We get a diverse economy where you don't need as many children to help out on the farm. And therefore, we have a declining or a slowing birth rate. And then post-industrial, since that birth rate has dropped and our death rate has been stable for a while, the population begins to slow down and even decrease. So here's a picture of that demographic transition, that pre-industrial to the transitional, to the industrial, to that eventual possibly declining population because of our low birth rate. So what causes a low birth rate? Well, it's all about the women, right? Increased education for women is a big factor in the fertility rate, as well as economic independence for women. If they're not dependent upon their families to either take care of them in old age or to provide economically for their family, then they don't have to have as many children. So a couple other things, are the children an important part of the labor force? Is it cost prohibitive to educate and raise children? Are there retirement systems available? Because some will have children to help take care of them in old age. If there is a pension system or a retirement system, and the government helps take care of people in their old age, and they don't feel as much pressure to have as many children. Infant death, infant mortality can affect birth rates because a couple does not need to have as many children because more of them grow up and make it to adulthood. Urbanization, educational and employment opportunities for women, we just talked about. How old a woman is when she gets married, the older they are, the less of those childbearing years that she has left. And then are there methods to control the birth rate, birth control methods? Are there religious beliefs or traditions or cultural norms that support or don't support a big family? So with our population changing, we really put a strain on our resources. And when we look at the resources that are shared by a population, we can call that infrastructure. Infrastructure is anything we all share, whether that's public water systems, sewer lines, power plants, the roads that we all drive on, the schools, the hospitals. If you've ever been to an urban area that's grown too fast, then you know their roads and their traffic are awful. They might not have enough schools, or maybe school overcrowding, enough medical services, because there's been more people growing faster than the infrastructure can keep up. So with rapid growth, whether it's to an area or whether it's global, we get suburban sprawl as people move out of an area and into the countryside. We get overcrowded schools and pollution. We get land that's been stripped of its nutrients and bulldozed up. We got housing that's inadequate. We've got expensive housing, if you know, from very urban areas. And use of our resources, we can start competing for those. So that will eventually become a limiting resource. Fuel wood, if you look at developing nations, they use wood to heat their homes and to cook their food. And so this is a very early sign that an area is growing too fast when they can't accumulate that wood fast enough to support their family's needs. And unsafe water, where we don't have good infrastructure, the local water supply is sometimes used for everything, whether it's sewage or drinking, cooking, washing clothes. And because of that, it becomes a breeding ground for all kinds of diseases and organisms that cause diseases. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, all of these affect very small children and are one of the leading causes of death of children worldwide. These are diseases that cause digestive issues, diarrhea, vomiting, and eventually end up causing dehydration and then death. Almost 1 billion people worldwide lack access to clean water, which affects their health from the diseases and from dehydration. We lose about 3 million each year to diseases spread through water. So I always love to leave you on a positive note. There are things that we can do to help increase the living conditions for what we call those bottom billion. And it's access to water. I'm going to put a video up over here that shows you a story from a group called Living Water of how they are working to help groups find safe water and how that can affect them. We also notice a lot of suburban sprawl and industrialization as people work in cities and move into the areas around those cities. You can get traffic jams, inadequate infrastructure, reduction of habitat. Your housing in your cities is more costly and more dense. And so to answer this, then we have groups that have gotten together and tried to limit population growth either through incentives or educational advertising or even punishments to work on declining birth rates.